buyer more responsibility with that level of responsibility. More vendors own a whole category versus sharing it, because you could argue they would have more capacity with less of, less touch points in the financials.
Okay.
And I think a lot of it depends on the engagement they have on actually building product with the vendor. If it's really about selecting what somebody else has already built, and that's the end of it, then you could argue that point whether it's the right decision for the retailer you're working on.
Okay. Great. Okay, so just to understand a little bit better the category alignment. So I guess when you most recently left Macy's, or I guess your broad understanding of the department, typical setup in a department store, is category alignment something that permeates both the merchandising and planning organization, or would you say that maybe the buyers are typically category aligned, but the rest of the planning and replenishment organization is functionally aligned? How did that look at Macy's and elsewhere?
I think it's more common that it's category aligned.
All functions?
It becomes broader depending on how focused the function is. So, but I do think in the end it ends up still being category aligned, just maybe a broader slice of responsibility, but still within that category.
Okay.
Like I've never heard of somebody who owns replenishment who is supporting replenishment in home textiles and in women's ready-to-wear. I don't think I've ever heard of that. Could somebody be responsible for an entire store at a senior VP level or something? Of course, that can totally happen. But in terms of a person directly responsible for the function, I think it is much more common that it is category driven.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so I just want to go through a list of some of the activities that typically happen from the end-to-end category merchandising cycle. And you mentioned, and I just want to understand who does what. So you mentioned, so of course, assortment is done by the buyer. Pricing, you mentioned, is owned by the buyer. Could you speak to promotional strategy and who typically owns that piece of the business?
I think it happens on the merchant side, not just the buyer, but their divisional, all the way up through obviously the corporate strategy and promotion, but definitely on the merchant side, not on the planning side. I've never heard of it any other way. Okay.
Yep. And what about, planogram setup and maintenance of planograms? Do you typically see a separate planogram team, or is that integrated into another role?
It depends on the category, but I would say that on the merchant side, predominantly, with possibly support from a store execution team in the store's organization. People who'd be more familiar with equipment and labor capability, help people be realistic about what can and cannot get done. I think that's true across the board. I've heard that same description in many different retailers. Okay.
Okay, great. And then how about, so you mentioned financial planning, that's really sitting with the planner, and you see the trends going in that direction. And as well as ownership of category performance. So really the P&L performance of the category, that's sitting with the planner. And correct me if I got that wrong.
Well, at the lower levels,
yeah.
But the performance of the category the team is responsible for it. You know, they're dividing
Right.
up
Okay.
the work to get to the result.